Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched WandaVision episode 9. Let's talk about it. So the time has finally come. We have finally seen the finale of WandaVision, the first ever TV series that the MCU has given us on Disney+. This was such a huge deal because it's the first time that we're going to be getting a TV series that will directly link into the MCU films. And so the whole world was watching. The whole world was watching. The stakes were high. Expectations were even higher. And here we're going to be talking about whether or not I feel like the series met those expectations or perhaps even exceeded them. But I have to say right off the bat, when it comes to expectations, okay, when it comes to whether or not the series actually met them, I personally think that the series did meet the expectations that were set for it at the beginning of the show. I think at the beginning of the show, considering what we were expecting from the show, which was not much because it was sold to us as something quite weird, quite unique, something we've never seen before in the MCU, I think it very much lived up to those expectations and to that hype. But the problem was, is that the episodes weren't dropped in order for us to just binge them all over a weekend. They were dropped on a weekly basis. And as the weeks went on, our expectations skyrocketed because all of a sudden we had theories upon theories upon connections upon references that were being analyzed here. And unfortunately and just inevitably, I feel like the series could have never lived up to those expectations, to that level of hype. But we're going to be talking more about that in another video that will be coming up on my channel probably on Sunday, where I'll be talking about our theories and our expectations and what actually happened, the things that we got wrong, the things that we got right along the way. So if you're interested in finding out my thoughts on all of that, then please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Without further ado, let's discuss the events of this episode and my thoughts on the finale of WandaVision. So first off, let's start off with who was undoubtedly, indisputably, the most important character of the entire series. Yes, of course, I am talking about Miss Wanda Maximoff herself, or should I say Mrs. because she got herself hit in this series. But this series did such an incredible job with the character of Wanda. Never before has she gone through such emotional depth, such an emotional character journey, such an incredible character development arc. It was truly astounding to see. I think the writers did this character such justice. It's truly impressive. And at the same time, we can't sit here even for a second talking about the excellence of Wanda's depiction in this series without mentioning the brilliant, the amazing, the truly astounding performance of Elizabeth Olsen as this character. She truly hit it out of the park. She was actoring, okay? She wasn't messing around. You might have been, but she wasn't. And if she isn't nominated for an Emmy later on this year, then we'll know why. It'll have nothing to do with her performance and everything to do with Hollywood's general bias against genre filmmaking. So I think she was just truly astounding in this series. And when it comes to this finale specifically, the character went through such an emotional arc in this episode alone that it was truly astounding to see Elizabeth Olsen deliver in every single scene here, and it's just representative of what she's been doing throughout the series. But here at the beginning of the episode, we do see the follow-up to what happened in episode 8 when it was revealed, okay, we finally got a name dropped that Wanda is in fact the Scarlet Witch who is practicing chaos magic. Now during this confrontation, of course, Wanda isn't interested in hearing Agnes's theories and her reporting after the findings that she made in the previous episode, because she's looking at her children who are in front of her and are in danger because Agnes has them hostage. That's what she's focused on right now. And she reminds Agnes that because they're outside and no longer in her witchy, basement, that she's no longer under the protection of her own runes, which means that Wanda can use her magic against her once more. Now that will come in handy later on as we see that Wanda is processing things quickly. She may not have gotten the traditional witchcraft lessons that Agnes did, but she certainly is a fast learner. So once the kids are free and Wanda sends them off to their room in this cute little nod to parenting, go to your room, okay, kids? She ends up having this confrontation with Agnes, witch on witch, okay? This is the beginning of our witchy fight. And so we see Wanda using her powers against Agnes, but she quickly learns that she can no longer do this because as soon as she hits Agnes with her magic, Agnes starts to absorb it. Just as she did when she was on the stake in 1693 in Salem. She starts to absorb Wanda's magic because she has the ability to absorb people's powers and people's magic. And so the more that Wanda hits her, the more powerful she will actually end up becoming. And so Wanda, being the fast learner, decides to take on a different route and hits Agnes with a car, and she ends up being slammed into a house, where we get a reference to the Wizard of Oz there, with her boots being the only thing left after Wanda takes a look at what she's done. Now this series of events is interrupted by the arrival of White Vision, who we will talk about later on in this review. But in terms of Wanda and Agnes's battle here, it's very much a battle of a witch who has raw power, raw energy, okay? She is one of the most powerful beings in the MCU at this point in time, not even counting at the end there where she fully embraces her Scarlet witchery. She's one of the most powerful beings versus someone who's incredibly knowledgeable, someone who is at least 400 years old. She knows what she's talking about when it comes to witchcraft. So you have this battle here of raw power versus someone who has acquired knowledge over an extended period of time, and that's what really makes this engaging, on top of course of the fact that the actresses here in these scenes are absolutely phenomenal. And despite the raw power that Wanda demonstrates, Agnes never seems fazed. She never seems surprised, she never seems shocked. It's like she's done this before many times over, and she probably has, honestly. Now whilst I very much enjoyed the light show that we got throughout this episode, with Wanda fighting against Agnes, using her red energy against Agnes's purple energy, and the way that their powers manifested with one another, and we'll talk about that again later on throughout this review. But overall, I would say what I found even more compelling were the characters. I very much felt like the character arc that Wanda has gone through really made these scenes work even better, especially because, and I hate to say it, I hate to say it, although I did warn you, because I remember when I was reacting to the Disney Investor Day trailers, and in the case of the WandaVision trailer, we did get some scenes, we did get some snippets of the scenes that take place in this finale, and I remember saying that I felt like some of those outdoor scenes looked a little bit cheap, looked a little bit, you know, uncinematic, and unfortunately, after having seen the finale within which these scenes take place, I still stand by that. I still stand by that idea that they do look a little bit cheap. I wish they had a bit more atmosphere, a bit more ambiance to them, as I said in my review last week, in fact. But then we do get the scenes where Agatha and Wanda are fighting against each other in the town center, and all of a sudden the skies become red as Wanda's powers, you know, take hold. And that's supposed to set up a sense of atmosphere, a sense of ambiance as well. But in that case, I feel like the CG let it down. The CG let it down, and overall I would say that the CG in this episode at times was quite bad. And I actually feel like it's not really a budgeting issue necessarily, as opposed to a time issue, because I do believe that they were filming this series right up until the very end of 2020, so they really didn't have enough time, unless they scheduled it so that they prioritized the scenes that would have a lot of post-production necessary, which they likely did. But I still think that more time would have benefited the show, especially for this finale, because it was very effects heavy, and the effects oftentimes, I'll be honest, did not hold up. So that was unfortunate, because that was a clear attempt to create the atmosphere that I'm talking about, having these red skies with these dark clouds, and them, you know, flying in these skies as, you know, evil witches do. But unfortunately, because of that rocky CG and also the wire work being quite obvious, I personally didn't enjoy the witchy battle sequences quite as much as I thought I would. But once again, what I found particularly engaging when it came to this episode is how it added to Wanda's character arc, and I found it very interesting how the series decided to not only put Wanda against Agnes, okay, have her fighting against this foe, this other witch who is incredibly powerful, but not as powerful as her, and is able to absorb her powers. Not only that, but we also see Wanda be confronted by the other residents of Westview, as we see Agatha snap them out of their trance that Wanda has put them in, and all of a sudden they are blaming her, all of a sudden they are begging telling her to end this. All of a sudden, Wanda is faced with these real life people, with real life families and the people who care about them that they have had to abandon, who haven't seen them in days, because Wanda decided to create this whole new world for herself because she wanted to live in this fantasy, in this idealized reality. And so for the first time, Wanda has to face this. She has to reconcile with what she's actually done to these innocent people. And it seems as though that previously she was in denial because she was like, no, I gave you good lives. Like, it's impossible. I didn't put my trauma onto you. But they're telling her that's exactly what happened. As soon as the lights came off, as soon as they went to sleep, all of a sudden they were forced to face Wanda's nightmares and Wanda's traumas in their minds. So it is during this scene that we do see one particularly interesting resident of Westview, that of course being Dottie, who finally makes a reappearance after episodes upon episodes of speculation surrounding her. And listen, okay, so this was one of the examples of the speculation, of the predictions, of the theories getting out of hand. Because after Dottie's initial appearance in episode 2 of the series, people were sure. People were sure that something was up with this character. People were sure that there would be this huge reveal surrounding this character. Perhaps she was a Mephisto. Perhaps she was another witch. Like, something was going on with this character. And again, we'll talk about that in my follow-up video, talking about all the theories that people had for this series. But it turns out she's just a regular old resident of Westview who has a daughter that she's very concerned about because apparently her daughter is trapped in her room, as are the other kids, when Wanda has no need for them. So ta-da! Like that's it. That's it. Unfortunately, a lot of the kind of clues and hints to Dottie being something more than she actually is were misguided, were misdirects perhaps, or perhaps were just entirely unintentional. But that's who the character ends up being, and we kind of just have to deal with it and move on. I'm so sorry. Now, also during the sequence in the town center, it is revealed by Agatha that the book that she has in her basement is actually the Darkhold. Now, this Darkhold book is this mystical, magical book from the comics and apparently from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as well, but it seems to be a book of spells or some dark magic. And according to Agatha, there are even a few pages in there about the Scarlet Witch. But actually, what's more than that is that when we do see the Darkhold itself opened up to a page that is presumably about the Scarlet Witch, on the opposite page, right next to it, we do seem to see some sort of illustrations that are very reminiscent of the MCU's representation of the multiverse. Listen, the multiverse is coming. Again, we're going to be talking about it in my next video, but don't you even worry about it. The multiverse is coming because the book said so and the Darkhold never lies. But I find it very interesting that, you know, Wanda, or the Scarlet Witch, has become a thing of legend, has become a sort of myth in the MCU now. It's not just a title that they give to the Avenger, but rather an actual mythical creature from lore, almost like the Dark Phoenix, actually, come to think of it. She's basically the Dark Phoenix of the MCU. And so she's even covered in the Darkhold this book about dark magic, which kind of tells me that Wanda may not necessarily always be the hero that she's presented as at the end of this episode. Now, after Agnes shows Wanda just how much suffering and pain she has put the residents of Westview in, Wanda does finally decide to open up the hex so that they can finally escape. But unfortunately, opening up the hex means that the things that Wanda has created in the hex, okay, the entities that were born from the hex and from her magic specifically, will no longer be able to survive in the outside world. And so when we see Vision fighting against other Vision, which we'll talk about in a second, and we see him start to kind of break down, as we saw when he tried to exit the hex previously, it's shown to us pretty clearly that he would not be able to survive outside of the hex should Wanda continue to, you know, pull it back and take it back within herself. And so she ends up reversing that once again and putting the hex right back up. Presumably the residents of Westview were able to escape, although I don't know how. They would need some really good running shoes to make that distance, but presumably they're able to escape. And so all you have left is Wanda and her family, and of course Agatha. And speaking of her family, during the scenes that take place in the town center, we do get the appearance of the twins once more. They decided to break free of their room after realizing the danger that their parents were in because of Billy's powers. And we do get this cute little scene that's very reminiscent of The Incredibles, of course, where the whole family's fighting against Agnes and they're using their powers. And of course, they're also coming up against Sword, because of course Hayward saw that the hex was opening up, so he decided to take his chance to enter the hex, and they ended up confronting Wanda and her family as well. So you see the family fighting against the other Vision, against Agatha, against Sword, and it's this really cool Incredibles moment. But I have to say, personally, if I'm going through the good and bad of this episode, I felt like the presence of the kids felt a little bit childlike to me, okay? It did feel a little bit like a kid's show to me personally. There's something about having the kids there with their kind of kiddie acting, which is cute, okay? They're so adorable. I'm not trying to knock them in any way, but it gave me very Disney Channel original movie, okay? It gave me very Disney Channel original movie circa 2009. I didn't know how I felt about the presence of those kids in those scenes. It kind of took away some of the gravitas that those scenes had when it was just the adults fighting against each other for dear life. Whilst the kids are taking care of the military, as Wanda asked them to, she ends up flying back into the sky with Agatha in order to face her once more. Except this time around, Wanda is starting to learn. She's starting to use some of the lessons that Agatha has been spouting out in her monologues, and so she is able to use another trick that we haven't seen in a very long time, with her mind manipulation skills, and she's able to take Agatha back into the time of the Salem witch trials, where once again she is on the stake, except this time around the tables literally turn and Wanda ends up getting on the stake herself, as the dead witches whose powers were sucked out of them by Agatha end up being revived and calling her the Scarlet Witch and chaining her to the stake in the way that they did to Agatha before they died. So that was a very fascinating sequence that we got there, but what really stood out to me was the kind of callback to Avengers Age of Ultron, where we see Wanda use her mind manipulation powers that she hasn't done in a very long time, and I think it's unfortunate because it was a cool trick, but it also serves to emphasize the kind of villainous angle to Wanda, the fact that she's not above causing psychological trauma to another person, despite the fact that she has suffered the same thing herself. But speaking of Wanda being a very quick learner, another trick that she's able to learn from Agatha from her lengthy monologues is using the runes to her advantage. I thought that was a very nice twist where we saw Wanda putting up these runes on her own hex in order to prevent Agatha from being able to use her magic. After Agatha had thought that she had all of Wanda's magic absorbed from her, she could no longer use that because all of a sudden her powers became absolutely useless within the hex. So I thought it was a very clever twist there. I kind of saw it coming moments before it happened, but it was very satisfying to see just how clever Wanda has gotten. Of course, we did get that great reveal where Wanda is finally in her full Scarlet Witch glory. She has the crown on, she has the brand new outfit, a brand new costume, which looks stunning on her. I think it was a truly magnificent look, and so I very much was convinced by the idea that the powers of this incredibly ancient entity, this legendary entity, was coming from this character and being used against Agatha. So when Wanda is able to take Agatha down, finally, she gives her the worst possible punishment. She doesn't just take her down, she decides to put her back into a trance where she is the nosy neighbor, and you see Agatha smiling almost painfully. Like, that is Catherine Hahn's acting for sure right there. She is just smiling so painfully. Her smile is stretched out in this, awkward and painful way, and you can see that this is emotional torture. But what really struck me as quite fascinating is that just before then, Agatha said, please, no, please don't do this to me. You are so cruel. And Wanda smiles. Wanda smiles when Agatha calls her cruel, which is interesting. And again, it kind of feeds into this idea that Wanda may not be the hero that she's portrayed as at the end of this episode. But ultimately, all good things must must come to an end because she does reconcile with the idea that she does need to say goodbye to her family. And so she ultimately decides to do the right thing in this series anyway, and decides to let go of her world. And conveniently enough, one of the last places that the world dissipates is of course at the epicenter, where we saw Wanda's house, the house that Vision presumably got for them before he ended up being snapped by Thanos. And so you do have that very touching and emotional goodbye sequence where Wanda first of all tucks her kids into bed, then she and Vision make their way downstairs, and before the inevitable happens, Vision does ask her, you know, what am I exactly? Who am I? What did you make me from? And Wanda explains to him that she made him from the parts of the Mind Stone that are within her. So that's how she was able to create a whole new Mind Stone. I had that question last week where I was talking about the kind of manifestation of Vision. I think I cut a lot of that out of my final video, but I had that question last week, so I was glad to see that it was answered here. And that to me tied right back into the idea that was explored in last week's episode, where Vision told Wanda, you know, what is loss? What is grieving if not the perseverance of love? And I feel like the manifestation of love that we have here from Wanda is the very form that Vision takes. Okay, so since we're already on the topic of Vision, before he ceased to exist, he did end up getting into a confrontation with his counterpart, Whitewashed Vision. Now, I predicted this to be the case in my previous review after it was revealed that Whitewashed Vision was something that Hayward had been working on all this time, and he required Wanda's powers in order to activate him. Well, we see him be activated and we see him enter the Hex no problem, because all of a sudden he is confronting Wanda and he ends up trying to pop her head. And also, I have to say, mere moments before Whitewashed Vision spoke, before he opened his mouth, a part of me was hoping, was praying that I would hear James Spader's voice. Okay, James Spader, who voiced the character, of course, of Ultron, who is such a key component to this story, with the character of Wanda and Vision both being introduced in Age of Ultron. I thought that there would be a link there where we would hear, you know, Whitewashed Vision be voiced by him. I also thought this because Paul Bettany had this funny little joke earlier this week or so, where he said that the big reveal in the finale would be an actor that he has always wanted to act against, someone that, you know, he very much admires, and blah 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 blah. It was him. It was him. He was talking about himself, like, lol. It was a pretty great performance on his part as well, honestly. It was quite convincing. But again, I will say that the CG did kind of let down some of those sequences a bit because it was quite shaky. But ultimately, this confrontation doesn't end in just blows, okay, at least not physical ones, but rather a battle of wits that takes place in a library. Like, how Vision, how Jarvis is that? That is such a Jarvis thing to happen, where the ultimate outcome of their fight is just them talking about this philosophical concept in a library as White Vision tries to figure out whether or not he is actually programmed to take down this Vision. Again, it's very interesting. It's a different way to kind of figure things out. You know, in the meantime, we have Agatha and Wanda going head to head using their magic, but then in the library you just have this battle of wits, which I think is pretty clever and very much in line with the characters of Vision ultimately. But what I did find quite interesting, I guess, and quite confusing, is that after this takes place and after Vision manages to restore the memories of Whitewashed Vision that was stripped away from him in order to make him this killing machine, he ends up just kind of leaving. He's like, oh, I am the Vision. And then he goes, he leaves. I expected him to kind of show up, at least in like an after credit scene, but no, we're done with him for now anyway. I do think that he will be back, because otherwise, why even bother? Like, he will definitely be back at some point. But yeah, that was the end of that, I guess. That was slightly disappointing, not gonna lie. Speaking of slight disappointment, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Of course, I'm referring to Fietro. Okay, so I'm going to discuss this in further depth in my follow-up video, as I said, talking about theories and predictions and all of that. But can I just say this, okay? One does not get Evan Peters on board in a project to waste him in such a way? Whose idea was this? Raise your hand. Whose idea was this? This was an awful idea, because in this case they knew exactly what they were doing. There were so many occasions where clearly, you know, things got out of hand when it comes to speculation, when it comes to the theorizing, when it came to, you know, all of these theories that were developed as the weeks went on. Things just got out of hand, and that's completely understandable. Some of these things were, you know, theories that channels made up that didn't really have enough of a footing in the series itself, so that's fine. But when it comes to Fietro, when it comes to casting Evan Peters as this character, they knew exactly what they were doing. This is not even just a red herring. This is not even just a misdirect. This was a troll and a half. And to which I ask Marvel, what did we do to deserve this? What did we do to deserve that? We didn't do anything. We gave you your biggest film ever in Endgame. We did what we were supposed to do as fans. Why are we being punished here? A part of me was truly astounded and truly disappointed that ultimately Fietro wasn't secretly Mephisto. He wasn't even secretly Pietro from an alternate reality, but rather just this random actor called Ralph Bohner. By the way, that also dismisses the whole theory surrounding Ralph himself, but Ralph Bohner... All this for a dick joke, really? It turns out he's just some random guy who lived in Westview and was an actor at some point. And you know, who does this remind you of? Who does this remind you of? This plot twist where it turns out that this guy who you thought was an evil villain who had, you know, real consequences in the MCU turns out to just be a lame old actor. Who does that remind you? Oh yeah, Sir Ben Kingsley portrayed this character, did he not? In Iron Man 3? In Iron Man 3? What, like 8 years ago? Why are we doing this again? Especially because Marvel knows the reaction that got, that plot twist about the Mandarin. Oh my god, it still haunts Iron Man films to this day. To this day. Why? Why would they go back to that? I am truly mind-boggled. I don't know why. Like, they saw how poorly it was received the first time and they were like, it's been 8 years, let's try again. And the thing is, it's not even just the fact that Fietro ended up just being a dead end. Like, he didn't end up being a character of significance whatsoever. That's already quite upsetting. That's already quite distressing. But it's not even just that. It's also the fact that the end credit scene that we got with Fietro and Monica, with him taking her hostage, ended up being also quite anticlimactic as well. Because it turns out all she needed to do was kick his ass real quick, and managed to remove the bead from his neck so that he was no longer under Agatha's spell, and then that was it. That was literally all she wrote. Like, that was literally the end that Fietro got. And speaking of Monica and her barely using her powers, her big kind of moment was when she came in and managed to save the twins from being shot, although I don't know how, because the bullet seemed to be going in between them and so it didn't seem like it was aiming towards either of the twins. But anyways, she saved their lives and that puts her in their good books for sure. But ultimately she doesn't really have a huge role in the finale. I thought that we would see more of a dynamic light show with Wanda's red and Agatha's purple, and then Monica coming in with her blue light from her eyes, although it turns out that the light kind of changes depending on how she's using her powers, which is interesting. But still, I thought she would have a bigger role in the finale, but she didn't. And I was like, oh, that's a shame. That's why you give superheroes their own origin story in a film. That's why, because otherwise they end up being just a small chapter in someone else's story. I promised I wouldn't be bitter about the fact that her introduction was in a Disney Plus show, but after seeing how little she was used in the finale, I'm a little bitter. Just a little bitter. And Monica's story doesn't quite end there, because afterwards she does have an interaction with Wanda where she tells Wanda that she understands why Wanda did what she did, and even though the rest of the residents of Westview clearly hate her, clearly despise her, you know, Monica is very much more sympathetic towards her because of course she recently lost someone who was very, very important to her as well in her mother, so she feels like she can connect with Wanda on an emotional level, because they share that common theme, that common ground of grief. I don't know how I feel about Wanda being able to casually walk away from the burning dumpster fire mess that she created in Westview. Like, I don't know how she's not walking away in handcuffs. She's literally done less and faced more consequences, but whatever. I guess the world is kind of very precarious right now, so, you know, law enforcement isn't really on it like that, but I think it was quite bizarre to see her just kind of walk away from the mess that she caused, completely unprovoked. In terms of Monica's story, we do see it end off with an end credit sequence where she is called by a mysterious, I guess, agent, maybe, you know, someone who's in a suit. And she and this lady head towards the abandoned cinema in the town, RIP to the cinema going experience. And they end up, you know, talking, and this lady tells Monica that she has been summoned by a friend of her mother's, and then it is revealed that this lady is in fact a Skrull. Now, I don't know about you guys, but what do you want me to do about this? I already know Monica's going to be in Captain Marvel 2. I suspect that her mother's friend is actually Carol, or perhaps it's Nick Fury, or, you know, whoever it is. I don't care. I don't care, because I expected this Skrull reveal to be earlier on. Remember when we thought that Reed Richards would be randomly making an appearance on this show? Well, I thought it'd be more likely that it would actually be a Skrull who would be Monica's contact to get in the hex, you know, the third time that she needed to. But unfortunately, we get this big reveal at the end of the series overall, and it's just kind of anticlimactic once again, because I thought that this was coming earlier. And speaking of anticlimactic, what used to be one of my favorite segments of these reviews is back, but it's not bigger than ever. Hayward is a dickhead, okay? Hayward is a dickhead. I've already established this for many episodes at this point, but this time around, he just went for it. Like, he went full villain this time around. Wow. He did not care at all, because he was willing to shoot children. Children. He was willing to shoot Billy and Tommy. Why? What? Now he's a child murderer? I don't understand where that came from at all. Not to mention the fact that I don't understand where he's coming from in terms of his overall motivations. I feel like they did a very bad job of establishing what exactly he wanted to achieve here, because I understand that he wanted Vision. That much was quite clear. But what did he want Vision for? Is it for future threats like Nick Fury? Because in that case, we already have a Nick Fury. Or is it because of some secret project? I initially also suspected that perhaps he wanted a Vision in order to sell him off, or in order to kind of team up with some bad guys like AIM or Hydra, because, you know, after he insisted that there was so much suffering and so much hardship that they endured during the 5 years when other people were snapped, it seemed as though he was alluding to the fact that he had to make some dirty deals during that time. And I felt like perhaps that one of those deals was, you know, getting Vision back online or something, you know, at least something to kind of suggest like the only way he was able to keep the lights on at Sword was by selling off someone like Vision, which is why he would know Vision's price tag, 3 billion price tag to heart, because that price tag is very much, you know, ingrained in his mind. Like, maybe some kind of motivation surrounding that, but no, we didn't even get that in this episode. So the character of Hayward, kind of disappointing, not gonna lie. Although I have to say, it was very satisfying to see Darcy hit him with that ice cream truck as she finally made her reappearance. I was also sad to see so little of Darcy in this episode actually, but that was very satisfying to see. And now that I've broken down the finale episode, I did want to go through my thoughts on WandaVision as a series overall. Now, I have to say first and foremost that the cast here did such an excellent job of realizing these characters. I think the series was very well written, especially when you have the incorporation of these real life sitcoms from the 20th century as well as the early 21st century being incorporated into this MCU storyline, and revealing elements of these characters little by little to kind of peel back the layers of these complex characters like Wanda and indeed Vision, and allow us to get a better insight into them in a way that we haven't been able to in the other films, where they've been basically in our periphery the whole time. And now we did also get that end credit sequence with Wanda, where it seems as though she is still learning. Okay, she is very eager to learn more about the powers that seem to be within her. So we see her using this very similar Doctor Strange technique of astral projection where she's, you know, reading the dark hold, and at the same time her physical form seems to just be wandering around this very isolated house that she may have created for herself or may have been there, you know, previously. But then in the very last moment of the whole series, we do hear the voices of Billy and Tommy calling out to her, and she seems quite alarmed by this, and it seems as though she is going to try and find out exactly what's going on there. So the series has also built a great jumping point for the character of Wanda progressing forward into phase 4 of the MCU. So with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving WandaVision an 8 out of 10. So that's it from me, finally. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on WandaVision, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the finale and the series overall down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!